In this video, we're going to break down everything you need to know to learn how to become an investment banker. Better yet, at the end of the video, we will share some tricks you can use to help overcome a low GPA or lack of experience and still land these investment banking internships and jobs over Ivy League students. So if you really want to see why investment banking can get you on track to making $250,000 annually just 5 years out of school, then you're going to want to watch this whole video. I'm Todd, and I help students and recent grads land some of the highest paying jobs in finance. Let's dive in. All right, so we're going to cover a bunch of things today when it comes to how to get into investment banking. And it's a super complicated process and it's hyper competitive. So understanding how everything works is going to be really important. So this is what we're going to cover today. Number one, how the investment banking hiring process works and why you're probably not prepared for that, which you'll see a little bit later on. The main factors investment banks look for and what you should focus on. And then last but not least, how to hack, quote unquote, the hiring process and land the internship and job, even if you don't have a perfect GPA or relevant experience. And that is going to tie into a couple things we're going to go through later. One of them being the IELTS analyst program, which we put together and has helped students with lower GPAs and those at non-target schools beat out Ivy Leaguers for investment banking internships and jobs. We'll explain more how that works later, but it's going to be super, super important because experience is everything in investment banking. And then for those of you that don't have time to watch the whole video today, we actually put together a book recently, which is going to cover pretty much everything we have today in much more detail. So there should be a button somewhere in the top of this video where you can see the links to both of these if you want to check both of them out. And both of those are also going to be in the description of the video today. So let's dive in. First off, why does everybody want to get into investment banking? If you don't know that by now, you should. But here are the main things, which you'll shortly learn. Investment banking is super popular because within your first year right out of school, you can easily be making six figures, which is awesome for many of you. And more importantly, you do 1-2 years of investment banking and you kind of get that golden ticket to move to the buy side, which is hedge funds, private equity, sometimes venture capital, etc. And that's where the real money's made. So point being, 5 years out of school, you could be making $250,000 a year. And that's after bonus, and that can be more or less depending on the deal flow, the private equity firm or hedge fund performance is, and that's why this is so popular. So it's a really, really competitive space, and rightfully so because of the amount of money that comes with it. So the people that actually make it into investment banking know what they're doing and they're ready for it, right? So here's basically how the job process works. So number one, you apply online like you would any job. And then more likely than not, you're going to get what's called a hire view or like a pre-recorded interview. So pretty much everybody gets these. They're not super special. And it's literally like this pre-recorded interview software where they like read your facial expressions and do all this stuff to basically determine if you're a good fit for the job. But in reality, what this is it's basically a filter to filter out people that, aren't qualified, or just to kind of make it seem like they're actually pretending to interview you. But at the end of the day, the people that actually get interviewed by a real person are the ones that network or have some kind of connection or just have an absolutely killer resume, which we'll get into later. So in reality, most people don't get past this line, right? They do this stuff, they get their hire view pre-recorded interview. They're like, oh, maybe I'm close to something, but in reality, you're not. What really matters if you actually get interviewed by a person. So that could next step be in the forms of a informal or informational interview. So sometimes that could be on the phone. You could actually maybe meet someone that works at the bank in person. It's just kind of like it says, a informal / informational thing for that person to basically kind of decide if you're a good fit and if you should actually continue the interview process. But in reality, usually what happens after that is you have some sort of on-campus interview. We had the whole COVID thing, which kind of screwed things up a little bit, but that's kind of usually where things start, and that could usually be someone at the company, usually someone in HR, maybe an alumni of the school will go there to interview people. That's kind of like lower in the firm. And those are more behavioral based questions. So nothing super technical when it comes to valuation or anything like or that. It's much more behavioral. And then if you pass that stage, then you get into the super day, which is much more technical. And that's where you get into things like valuation, your DCF modeling, your typical accounting questions, the whole 9 yards, right? That's where you really, really need to know your stuff, right? So, point being here that if you don't have the things that an investment bank is looking for, you won't get past this line. You'll never actually get interviewed by a real person, and you won't actually have a chance to show that you know your stuff, right? So now let's move on from there. Okay, so what actually matters when it comes to getting into investment banking? So these 5 things probably ranked in order, I'd say. First off is experience, right? The tricky thing about investment banking is all these banks expect you to know how to do the job ahead of time, and they expect you to have experience doing that, which is usually pretty tough, especially considering that the recruiting periods for these investment banks are starting earlier and earlier, usually around sophomore year, right? So you need to have experience doing the job. If you don't have something on your resume that is related to banking or the type of work you're going to do on the job, it's going to be near impossible to actually get interviewed. Then number 2 is networking. And this is super, super important, right? If you went to a good school that has a strong alumni network and you have people that are working in banks, it's going to be a lot easier to get an interview at one of these banks. But if you go to a non-target or a state school like I did and many of the students we've worked with, it's a little trickier. So you have to really network with a lot of other people if you actually want to get in. At the end of the day, the point of networking is to basically get your resume in the hands of someone that could actually get you interviewed by a real person, right? You're pretty much trying to bypass all the gatekeepers that they put in place to not get you interviewed. That's the pre-recorded interviews, that's the resume scanners they use nowadays. You literally need someone in the bank to flag your resume and actually get you interviewed with a real person. And that's tough. And networking takes time, but it's well worth it when it's ready. So going off of that, obviously your school is very important, right? If you go to an Ivy League school, you're going to have a much better shot of getting interviewed by a bank. But if you go to a school that doesn't have a lot of alumni working at banks, it's going to be much harder. Then, of course, what always matters is your GPA. So the tricky part is a lot of these banks will filter out based on your GPA. And some of them have minimums, like a 3.5 minimum, a 3.7 minimum. So it's kind of tricky, but that doesn't mean you still can't get the job. It just means you're going to have to work a little harder. And that's really why we put together our IELTS analyst program to basically help students in situations like this get jobs, specifically in investment banking. So if you are someone that doesn't have a strong GPA, you're going to need to do some little more work to obviously be able to stand out and get the job. Just because they have the minimum in place doesn't mean you can't get the job. It just means that you're going to have to work harder to get that interview and prove that you know your stuff. Which, speaking of, the last point here is the technical knowledge, right? So if you did your networking, you got some experience on your resume, and you're able to actually get interviewed by a person, this is your chance to actually show that you know your stuff. So obviously you'll have to get through the behavioral interviews, but more importantly, you're going to have to get through the technical interviews, which is where you need to show that you know your valuation, your modeling, your accounting, the whole 9 yards, right? So if you're someone that didn't have the best GPA, didn't go to the best school, but you're able to get to this point and show that you know your stuff, they will always pick the candidate that knows things better, even if you didn't go to an Ivy League and there's someone else there that apparently came to a better school, but they didn't have the technical knowledge and they actually don't know what's needed for the job. They're always going to hire the person that actually knows how to do the job. You just have to get there, and that's the hard part. So let's move on to this, which is basically how you get experience, right? So this is what's really tough, is getting experience to actually qualify for these kind of jobs, right? So obviously you can get an internship, right? So you can get an investment banking internship, but to get an investment banking internship, you basically need experience already, which makes it even harder, especially when you're applying for these things as a sophomore, when it's pretty hard to get experience. So that's an option, but it's tough. That being said, you can get internships in other somewhat related fields there, but that might not be easy for some of you, right? Another really good thing is student-run investment funds. So A good chunk of colleges have these where basically they select a group of students to manage a portion of the school's endowment usually. It could be anywhere from a couple $1,000s to a couple $1,000,000. And this is really great for your resume because you actually get work doing this kind of stuff. So you're going to be doing like, stock pitches and research reports, the whole 9 yards. You're going to get to put that on your resume, which looks really, really good because it's pretty relevant to the types of stuff you'll do within investment banking. So that's a great thing to look for. But usually that's only for people that are juniors and seniors, but definitely something to look for. Another thing, which we mentioned earlier, is our IELTS analyst program. So this is great for those of you that don't think you have the experience you need and need something on your resume to help you stand out. So this program is basically a hybrid between a course and an internship. So you're learning how to do the work, all the modeling, all the accounting, all that kind of stuff, but you're actually getting work doing that kind of stuff. So you're assigned a company to work on. You have a mentor that helps you throughout the whole thing. You have assignments where you need to submit your work, go back and forth with the mentor to basically show you where you're wrong, and then you move on to the next lesson from there. So by the time you're through the program, you get a bunch of stuff to put on your resume that looks really good, and it helps you stand out a lot. And we've done very well with students that didn't have the best backgrounds, didn't have the best GPAs, but went through our program, got to put that on their resume, did a bunch of networking and interview prep stuff with us, and landed a good chunk of jobs. That's all across the different investment banks, the bulge bracket banks, middle market, the whole 9 yards. So definitely something worth checking out if you think you are someone that really needs that piece of experience and need to learn at the same time. There'll be probably a button somewhere near the video you can click to check it out, or just go to the link in the description. Next up, we have our unpaid internships and mentorships. So I know some of you might be like, oh God, I don't want to do an internship unpaid, but if it's a good internship where you get relevant experience, so you can put that on your resume, it's well worth it. So even if it's like a part-time thing where you're only doing stuff for a few hours a week, well worth to do it, even if it's unpaid, to put it on your resume. And there's lots of these out there. In our book that we just put out, the Finance Job Formula, you can basically get a list of where to find some of these. Again, link will probably be somewhere in the description of the video, but don't rule things out just because they're unpaid. It'll still help you stand out. Another really good one are stock pitch competitions. So again, this is a later stage thing for those of you that are maybe juniors or seniors. But the CFA has a CFA research challenge. Individual colleges will have their own stock pitch competitions. I know we've gotten multiple students that went through our IELTS analyst program into like Harvard's, and they've made it to the finals, although they didn't win, but they got close. But again, a great thing to put on your resume because it shows that you have that kind of somewhat relevant experience, even though it's not exactly work experience. It's something very relevant. It shows that you have that kind of technical know-how. So, and again, something to check out. And then for those of you that are kind of late to the game / graduates, things are obviously trickier, but here's kind of what you want to consider. So first off, which is kind of super popular these days, the CFA. You can get the CFA. It's 3 tests, but it's a little diluted now because pretty much everybody tends to get these, but still something great to have on your resume, but it's not like it's something you can do right away. It's going to take you probably a couple years to get it done. MBA, this is another popular one we hear a lot, but super caveat here. Don't get an MBA unless you're going to go to like a top 15 school. The only reason you really want to get an MBA is for the networking, the alumni, and having those connections, right? If you go to get your MBA at a random state school, it's not going to help you get into something like investment banking because, you're basically paying for the network when you go to a top 15 program. So this could work very well if you're out of school and you kind of want that career change, but don't do it unless you can get into a top 15 school. Plus, it's like you're paying $200,000 plus to go get your MBA. So make sure it's worth it. Then the other one we always like to highlight a lot is what we call our stepping stone jobs. So basically, the whole point of these is to get a job, whether it's at a college or a little out of college, that is somewhat relevant to investment banking that you can basically leverage into investment banking. So that can be anything from equity research, where you're writing kind of those stock research reports you probably hear about on like CNBC. Corporate development's another good one. It's basically where you're doing M&A work for like Fortune 500 companies, or companies that are basically doing roll-ups constantly, like that's a really, really great one to get into. And that's obviously hyper relevant to investment banking. And then another great one too is credit. So when you're doing credit at like some of the rating agencies like Moody's, S&P, you're doing all the kind of modeling you'd be doing at investment banking. You're working on deals all the time. Like the bankers are coming into the office to basically get the credit ratings. So again, hyper relevant. It's something that you can definitely leverage into a investment banking job. So that is basically your overview of how to get into investment banking. And again, most of you watching this now probably are going to be lacking in the experience category, maybe the GPA category as well. And, a chunk of you could also be late to the game here, and you might need to consider things like this. So again, if you're lacking on the experience side, definitely check out our IELTS analyst program. Again, we'll probably have a button somewhere you can click in the corner of the video or in the description, which can definitely help you out there. Or check out the book we just put out, which basically talks about everything we just did today, but in much more detail, from everything from the networking, interviewing to all the different types of jobs out there. Again, a great read for those of you that really, really want a comprehensive overview. But that is what you're up against in investment banking. So again, great career to get into. It's hard. It's a lot of work. You'll make a lot of money. But if you could suck it up for a year or two and then leverage that into something on the buy side, you'll do very, very well. So again, if you have any questions or want things explained in more detail, leave a comment. And of course, always subscribe and follow.